Welcome back to PenguinPod. We have been talking to a number of parents in particular about autism and their journey with their children. And I thought it would be fun to talk to Rachael, who worked with autistic children for 12 years, and see what she had to say. We've been specifically looking, Rachael, at kind of early signs, specifically like geared towards, I suppose, someone who might have a child who is younger, a pre-diagnosis, and they're thinking, there might be something slightly different about my child's neurotype. So what the early signs are, but also what their experience was of going through the assessment process, and particularly what their experience was working with the school, either before, during, or after diagnosis. So that's kind of where we've been going with parents. So tell us a bit about your experience then with autistic children.
I mean, I think for me, the most important thing to say in terms of all children as well is like, we're all unique and we're all different. So that doesn't mean if you're diagnosed or pre-diagnosis with autistic spectrum disorder, it manifests itself differently in every individual because every individual is different. So that kind of, I guess, makes it harder because everybody has their own kind of autism. They're autistic, because they're an individual. So really, I think before a child is diagnosed, it becomes quite clear with communication, taking things literally, not being able to pick up on nuance or little phrases, almost like we're speaking foreign language in a way, comes up like a lark or whatever, and we come out with all of these all the time, and they're very confusing for somebody who takes things at face value, which is often a trait of autism. Also, there's the eye contact. You may get eye contact, you may not get very much at all. So that's something to watch out for if a child's able to make eye contact, or if they're finding it difficult. And you've got to remember, of course, when you first meet somebody that you don't know, you probably won't give them as much eye contact as somebody that you do know, so we have to look at it from a human perspective.
Sure.
The circumstances that are surrounding the situation, obviously if there's a child who will be very close to the parent, if there's less eye contact there, that's a bit of a signifier really, isn't it? Little obsessions and routines and rituals as well, they're things that I would watch out for. These aren't necessarily bad things. In fact, I would say they were the flip of that. These are things that the child finds really interesting and get some kind of positive stimulation from. And I think managing guided in the correct way, it's almost like what we used to call gifted and talented, isn't it? If you can find home that autistic trait into what they're interested in, they can be very productive. When I used to work at the autistic side, that was with teenagers, and I worked with one lovely girl. She was absolutely lovely, and she was completely obsessed with babies and baby clothes and laundry, and it was a big fight within the residential home to allow her to go and touch and put away other residents' belongings, because she knew what was all those drawers, and it was a big fight to say, why don't we just give her that as a job? And she ended up working at Mother Care, and boy, did she sort out that warehouse, but she did, because she just was so focused upon it,
Right.
Playing to those strengths as well as supporting what the child may find quite difficult, and even in school, I would certainly, if I had a child who might not have the same understanding for whatever reason, you can pre-teach it. So,
Right.
So tomorrow, Jimmy, we're going to be learning about this, and then I'll just have a word with mummy or daddy and maybe just have a look over this tonight. So they sit there on the carpet and they know what's coming. So you put them at a little advantage already.
Right.
To support them.
And that's a reasonable thing to expect a school to be able to do.
Yeah. Well, if the teacher has a teaching assistant, and if the teacher has a lesson plan, and if the teacher has a long-term overall plan, then it's quite easy, isn't it, to pick off. You could do it for a child with English as additional language. You could do it for a child, I don't know, with any special learning needs. And as teachers, I'm not having a go at all. Teachers work hard. They're under an incredible amount of pressure. The difficulty is that they're under an incredible amount of governmental pressure for everybody to be the same. So
Now,
immediately that is impossible.
we hear the term a lot, at least within the circles that I'm moving in with other parents of autistic children or suspected autistic children, the phrase reasonable adjustments. And this has become a bit of a sort of buzz phrase, I think, around schools and possibly what the workplace as well. And I was thinking about this last night. I was thinking about how when I travel on a train, I get sick, and it's a reasonable adjustment for me to travel in a forward-facing seat.
Yeah.
And everybody who purchases a train ticket has the option. I know it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes the trains are the wrong way around, but in theory, they have the option to choose a forward-facing rather than a backwards-facing seat, which I think is a reasonable adjustment for somebody who maybe feels nauseous on a train journey.
Yeah.
And I think we've got such a long way to go to kind of normalize different neurotypes and the needs that they might have, because I think the reasonable adjustments that are made, I felt at least that we need to repeatedly ask for what I consider to be reasonable adjustments to be put in place. For example, if my child is feeling nauseous, it's not because they're traveling backwards on a train, it's because they're in a crowded dinner hall and the smell is making them feel sick. And so to give them a sick bag and to have them just sit there and therefore not be able to eat their food, rather than allow them to maybe go and sit in a classroom, to me, a reasonable adjustment would be to allow that child to remove themselves from the thing that's making them feel sick, rather than to kind of weather through it. And I just don't think you would do that to an adult. I think you'd allow the adult to remove themselves from the source of the nausea. So I think when we say the phrase reasonable adjustments, it's kind of an irony, because they are reasonable and yet you have to keep asking for them. I just wondered what your view was on the phrase.
I hear you completely, and I think that any teacher worth their salt can see quite quickly on any child whether or not they're coping with whatever it is, learning, eating, playing, it should be second nature really, and I think it is. But I think that there's a prevailing Dickensian approach that we don't seem to have shaken off.
What's that?
That we will all sit at our desks and learn, and I know that the early years play, etc. But they very quickly, year one, they're all sitting at desks because guess what? They've got phonics screening. Guess what? They've got a light, and an interest and vitality. And I do feel like it just gets sapped out of them, and the teachers aren't able to use the creative approaches that they're capable of because of the regime, and because of that sort of very Victorian approach that we still have in schools. It's like, oh, year 6 SATs are out now, so we can do some art. We won't just do maths, English and science. 9 months of just doing maths, English and science and feeling anxious, and then it not maturing anyway because high school will just assess you and it'll just get worse. It's not a welcoming prospect, is it? I think in terms of food and eating, your son will not forget that.
Yeah.
Just like I don't forget things that happened to me when I was very small. And what we need to do as adults, whether we're teachers or not, is remember that feeling, because I won't do front crawl anymore because Mrs. Pemberton told me I was rubbish at it. And I remember being shamed and having to do a number 8 properly on the board repeatedly. And I think there is a shaming as well. If you can't be like Joe Bloggs, if you blip up or present any kind of difference,
a variance, yeah,
and some children are very good at masking, they're very good at getting on. But guess what? Some children are so unique and individual that never mind reasonable adjustments. What about bespoke approaches for individual children? What's wrong with that?
That's such an interesting point of view, because reasonable adjustment as a phrase to me starts with 30 children and looks at the deviation, for want of a better word, whereas bespoke approach starts with 30 different children and looks at how they might wish to learn or how they might wish to experience their day. And that leads me to another bugbear of mine. I don't have a problem with the phrase reasonable adjustment. I have a problem with the way you have to fight to get it implemented. If it's reasonable, you shouldn't have to have that fight. But the thing that really irks me at the moment is what I see as a bit of a battle between the word resilience and the word agency. So I want to teach my child agency, that he has the right to express something that's uncomfortable for him, that he has the right to ask for something to be the way he needs it to be, that he has the agency to do that. Whereas resilience seems to be something which is lauded as this kind of, if you're not teaching a child resilience, then you're not teaching them properly. But to me, if you're asking for resilience, what you're really asking for is for children to put up with what they're being asked to do. Whereas agency is a frightening thing, because that would be 30 children asking for something slightly different. So an example is my child's school arranged a trip, and it was a trip he did not want to go on. They were 8 and 9. They were going on a caving experience. They called it a limestone day. My son does not want to go on a caving experience. He's terrified of the concept of going into a cave, which I don't think is an unreasonable fear, to be honest with you. And I certainly don't think it's something you need to experience ever, let alone at the age of 8 or 9. And he was told repeatedly that this was about building resilience, and it was a once in a lifetime experience, and if he missed out on it, he'd regret it. And to me, it was the first time I'd realized the butting heads between, if you're resilient, it makes our life a lot easier, because everybody goes on the school trip, you're all resilient, you all do what you're told, basically. And you work through your fear, or ignore it, or learn to push it down, or learn not to say that you're not comfortable, which is a very dangerous thing. Whereas if children start expressing agency, you have children that don't want to go, and then you have to accommodate them differently. Well, he didn't go. But whenever I hear the word resilience, my ears prick up, and I think, what's actually being asked here? Because I know my child, everybody needs to be resilient in the face of an unpredictable life that throws nasty things at us. But I also think when you are a different neurotype, you're resilient every day. Sitting in that dining hall and not being sick when they're having a roast dinner is incredibly resilient. Doesn't need to go down a cave to prove that.
No, but is it resilience, or are they teaching children to be biddable? Not consciously.
Exactly.
Not consciously, the teachers out there, they are great people, but there's something broken, and I think that when you described your son being told he was missing out on a brilliant opportunity, it's anxiety provoking for me to hear that. Like, he must be thinking, well, I want to please my teacher.
Absolutely.
But I don't think I can cope with this, but maybe I should. And can you see the turmoil that you're creating inside the individual? And I love that term, agency. The way we teach children resilience is not giving them a box and saying, there's your resilience, crack on with it, whatever I throw at you. The way we teach children to be resilient is through modeling our own behavior, through sharing stories, of resilient individuals who have overcome things. That's how we teach resilience. We don't go and say, we are building your resilience now. What? Pardon? Are you? Thanks. That's not how resilience happens. It's a lifetime's work, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's organic.
Yeah, and I think agency is a great thing, because guess what? Yeah, you might have 30 children. By the way, that's 5, 6 to 30. So you've already split them up into groups which fit with each other better, yeah? So like, don't be overwhelmed, teacher. It's only like a few children. You've probably got someone helping you anyway, So it's not as daunting as it's made out to be. Never saw it as 30 in my class. Actually, I just saw it as like 31s, really. You know what I mean? 30 individuals. But, if you teach children agency, guess what? They're not going to agree on everything, but generally speaking, we as human beings want the greater good. Generally speaking, we know from our consciences the difference between right and wrong, of what feels right, of what feels wrong. We know when we get that guilty, bad feeling inside of us, and I'm not talking about behavior here, but what I'm saying is, if a teacher gave a class of 30 children the same scenario that was not fair, 9 times out, 10 out of 10, they would all say, no, that wasn't fair.
Yeah.
And that's agency, but yes, being able to speak up for yourself as well, and have a friend who says, oh, well, Billy doesn't want to stay in the hall because it's too noisy, or the smell's making him feel really cool. Do you think he and I could go and sit outside today because it's nice and sunny and eat our dinner? But we're so rigid, as adults and systems, they are so rigid, and they do want biddable children who do as they're asked. And you get those children, don't you, who go home and then tell the family, and then the family have to kind of get in touch, and the teacher probably is just totally unaware of the child's discomfort in whatever the situation was, because the child just sits and nods and just does whatever they're asked to. And like you say, that is a very, very dangerous situation. I would much rather have a child who caused a kerfuffle and said, no, I don't want to do that. That's making me feel uncomfortable. Because also to have that agency, it's a safe space, isn't it? You've got to provide a safe space for agency, and schools are safe spaces, but it's every aspect of that, isn't it? It's not just have you got a CRB and I got a CLB. It's more than that, isn't it? It's about, do the children feel safe enough? And they do all of this with them. Do you have an adult you can talk to if you were feeling concerned?
Sure.
But sometimes as well, that the child will be standing by the teacher, who is a very busy person, but the children come first. Miss, and it's a time pressure that's being put on the teacher that makes them feel like they can't deal with it. They haven't got the capacity. Where actually that's where it starts. I think you've built up enough courage to come over and tell you something.
Absolutely.
And trust you and feel safe with you and thinks that you will get the right result, then they'll come and tell you. If you keep ignoring them, guess what? They don't feel safe.
No, they're going to learn that their voice isn't important, and they're going to feel
listening.
No.
Yeah.
I think you've touched on something really important there, which is about safety and safe spaces. And I think quite understandably and quite correctly, there has been an enormous focus on safeguarding regarding keeping our children physically safe, and absolutely an amen to that.
Yeah.
However, I think in the rush to make sure that everybody's focused on that, we've kind of forgotten about emotional safety. Because it's not a crime to emotionally ignore a child at school per se, but especially again for a child who's struggles perhaps with anxiety, as a lot of the different neurotypes tend to do, like autism and ADHD, and a lot of neurotypical children as well, to feel safe emotionally when you're, especially in the younger years, when you're still getting used to the idea that you're not around your parents all the time. I think you touched on something there, because quite often my son just needs to know that the adult will crack a smile with him. This is just his thing. He needs to know that he can find a level. So we used to always meet. We couldn't do it for year one because of pandemic, but we used to, and we still do. We always meet with the teacher a bit beforehand. Everybody does. Everybody goes in and has an afternoon with the new teacher, but we request a bit of a one-on-one so that we can find a common ground with that teacher, see the whites of their eyes. They can see who he is, and they can hopefully just crack a smile, have a bit of a joke, so that he then goes away for the 6-week holiday, remembering that about the teacher. Not that they may have been trying to shut up a class of 30 who were just visiting their class for an afternoon, because that just makes September easier for him. And to be honest, it makes August easier for the rest of us as well. But I think emotionally safe spaces, I'll tell you this story. Once I was taking my son to school and he was struggling with school refusal. This was in year 2. And I promised him that I would stay with him until he felt better, until he felt okay for me to leave. Let's go. I'll come in with you and I'll stay with you until you feel safe for me to leave. We'll ask them to put us in a room somewhere. And then I was met at the door by the head teacher, who just swept him away from me. And I was so sideswiped by that I'm never going to forget that, because he just met us there and said, "Oh, you're fine with me though, aren't you?" And of course, my son looked at him and said, "Yes." And off they went. And he said, no, it's okay. I've got it from here," and shut the door. And it all happened so quickly. And I remember fuming my way back to the car. I just vowed that would never, ever happen again. And I did raise it with him. You don't just take my child off, because I've then broken my promise to stay with him until he feels safe. So, and that's about his agency. And,
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think, when you've got a parent there who, you've probably been quite happy to go into the classroom and
Of
just
course I would.
kind of be there
Absolutely.
and help out a bit. And the teachers are taught, one of the first things that they're taught when they go to do their teacher training is who are the first educators of the children? It's not you, it's the parents.
Absolutely.
It's the parents, and when they're under the teacher's care, they're in loco parentis, and that is a very privileged position to be in.
Mm. What do you think of the phrase autism spectrum disorder versus autism spectrum condition?
I think what you're hitting on here is the fact that, is it a disorder? It's just a different way of being, isn't it? So why are you disordered when another person is ordered? I don't. Yeah, it's just a negative connotation that goes with the dis, isn't it? The prefix. Don't really like that.
No, because I'm trying to work through, I guess, through this podcast series, I'm not trying to deny that autism spectrum can be disabling for some children and adults, because obviously it depends how the sensory processing presents itself and on all of the other elements. And obviously there are children and adults for whom their autism contributes to them feeling that they are disabled and they are, whatever that means to them. However, the spectrum is so broad. I think to call it a disability per se it leads me to question, is it a disability in itself, or is neurotypical society disabling that person?
Yeah, I think it's neurotypical, isn't it? It's just kind of saying we're right, we're normal over here, you're wrong, you're not normal, something wrong with you. Instead of celebrating unique individuals, it's like when you build a team, you get a room full of people who work in a team, and one of them can do this, and one of them can do that, and the other one can do that, and look her out the spreadsheet because she's absolutely chaotic, but boy, can she talk to people. You know what I mean? And that's what it is, and that's what a classroom should replicate almost, a really good, nourished team who work together and can work on their own. Just what you expect in the workplace, you need a mix, don't you, to get the best results. You need a good, strong team, but the team need to understand each other. Not like,
absolutely.
I'm really good at this, but you're not, because we all know that, but she or he is really good at that and that. And guess what? If we pool all these resources that we've got with your gifts and talents, we've got to do something really exceptional here.
If I was the parent of a young child at the moment who I was beginning to suspect they might be a different neurotype, they might be autistic, for example, what do you think you would recommend, or what would be your advice to them if they're sort of exploring that possibility?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I guess, the first thing I would say is your child the best and you are doing a great job. But take that knowledge that you have as a first educator of your child, where the strengths are, where the weaknesses lie. I don't like calling them weaknesses, but I can't think of another word right now. But what I'm saying is there might be areas it's very difficult to change.
Challenges.
Yeah, it's challenging to change it. And do we need to change it? If John doesn't make lots of eye contact, but he can still, that's all right. We're not going to spend hours on end talking about eye contact with John, are we? We're just going to crack on and focus on the good bits. But I think when approaching school or nursery, I would certainly mention it, say what their interests are, what they enjoy doing, how do they calm down, what strategies do you use if they get upset. Share all that with the teacher,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think as well, on the school website, if you feel like the individuality, and I don't mean that we're not better in groups either here, but if you feel like the uniqueness of your child is being forgotten, get on that school website and have a look at the policies, because I'll tell you now, a lot of them, especially the church schools, will say, we believe every child is unique. Yeah?
Yeah.
So we can always bring them back to that.
Yeah.
Okay, there's certain things we want them to be able to be doing, by a certain age, but not everybody eats at the same time, walks at the same time, talks at the same time,
absolutely
at the same time. We're all different.
Yeah. And you know what? If your child is at a school or you're considering sending them to school and it doesn't say that they consider all children to be unique, I would say that that's a bit of a problem with the school. Because as you were saying before, Rachel, in the workplace, in real life, once they're through the sausage factory that is school, they are going to find their place in the world. And I think you've really underlined that today. I think what I want to try and do is to take the fear away from the idea that your child might be autistic and see it as a celebration of a new understanding of your child, because they will find their place in the world if you support them.
For sure.
Just because they might stick out more at school because of that tendency to try and sort of same everybody with your nurture and support. You don't have to see their behavior as red flags or as indicative of, oh, this is a problem or I should be concerned. No, just understand them and kind of allow them to flourish even if they're kind of boxed in a bit in school. If you're going to keep them in mainstream school, because that as well as their parent, that is your choice in this country, in the UK. But if you do decide to keep them in mainstream school and educate them that way, then just do as much as you can outside of that to just remind them that they can curate a life for themselves that will work for them.
100%, you know, and that really goes back for me at that wonderful word you use of having agency and teaching the agency and the resilience through your modeling of how do you live your life, because children, they pick up on everything, you know, they see,
absolutely,
they listen. Yes, they can't hear you when you're talking about the lady next door, you know, it's like we think they can't hear us because they don't tend to say much in those situations, but I'm telling you, like, that they see and they hear everything. So it's much more valuable as a parent to lead by example than sit them down and start telling them how it's going to be, you know. And the same in school.
absolutely.
You know, if you have a teacher who shouts at you all the time, what, you know, apart from it destroying your self-worth and you being frightened most of the time and maybe even having an accident, you know, what's it teaching you? Nothing. But, you know, if you have a positive teacher who can say, yes, you did that, you know, and I don't know, you slammed the door and we've trapped somebody's fingers, you know, and but, you know, next time we need to do that. The kids know, they didn't mean it. And they know more than we think they know. What they do know, you know. you know, but the children know, you know, and they know if you do as well.
Right.
You know, and you have to have that understanding and that sort of, you know, if you have a child and they'll say, like, but I didn't do it, you know, I honestly, whatever it was, I didn't do it, I didn't get that wrong, I didn't leave that pencil there or whatever. You know, my answer would always be, the person who knows that is that child, you know. So if I don't know how to go, no, of course, I know you would never do anything like that. I know that you would never do anything like that. And immediately they become the child who would never do anything like that, not immediately, but over time, you know.
Sure. Because you're speaking goodness about them into their spirit, basically. Rachel, we're out of time, and I'm so thankful to you. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your insight.
Lovely to see you. Yeah, and good luck with it all. And
thank you.
Yeah, big up. You know, every child is brilliant. Just love them to bits and show them the way.
Thank you so much.
Bye.